This is Letter from America. Today's topic is Zanu PF top officials are privately admitting that they will lose the 2023 elections. Top Zanu PF officials are reliably reported to have now accepted they face a massive defeat in next year's general elections. The question now for Zanu PF is, this time and given the changing circumstances, how do they unconstitutionally, illegally, and fraudulently secure a victory just like they have done in the past? This conclusion by Zanu PF is based on several factors. First, top security agencies like the CIO have advised Zanu PF many times of the widespread dissatisfaction with Zanu PF, especially Mnangagwa. As a matter of fact, Mnangagwa wanted to prove that this information was true after he had been told by the CIO about this widespread dissatisfaction. He wanted to prove whether this was true. So he ordered an emergency audit of structures of Zanu PF at the cell level in June. The result of this audit, which received widespread national publicity, was a painful disaster for Zanu PF. It proved that what they had been advised by the CIO was true. Very few people attended the so-called audits in their cell structures. Some cells for Zanu had zero attendance, to the embarrassment of the party officials. Secondly, Zanu PF officials see for themselves every day that they have lost the support of the majority of Zimbabweans, to the extent that the ruling party is now, as a former top official put it, a shadow of its former self. It's just a shell without any substance. This official said Zanu PF has ceased to exist. No Zimbabweans want to be associated with the Zanu PF. Zanu PF is now a relic of the past, he said. But he said this should not have surprised anybody, because Zanu PF has lost every election since 2000. Zanu PF has only stayed in power through rigging elections. Zanu PF controls the government and the electoral system. According to Zanu PF, it is not the people who vote that determines the winner. It is Zanu PF that counts the vote that matters most. Rigging is Zanu PF lifesaver. And if rigging does not succeed, as happened in 2008, where Tsvangirai defeated Mugabe by 73% to less than 30%, the JOC steps in. JOC is Joint Operations Command, headed by the military. It will step in and it will use its power to change the numbers. In the case of the 2008 elections, the figures were changed to 47% for Tsvangirai and 42% for Mugabe, which forced a runoff. Secondly, Zanu PF officials have seen for themselves the very high levels of national dissatisfaction. Zanu PF campaigns and rallies among rural and urban populations have been a disaster. Zanu PF thugs are sent to people's homes where they threaten them with unspecified action if they do not attend the Zanu PF rallies. People are bused, often from very far, to the rallies. Shops and schools are closed. On the day of the rallies, people listen to extremely boring statements, especially by Mnangagwa. Mnangagwa's speeches at rallies do not contain anything that will help the people solve their problems, like lack of water and electricity supply, dilapidated infrastructure, lack of hospitals or medicines. Journalists have taken pictures of people leaving the rallies before they are finished. In some cases, police were mobilized to stop the people from leaving those rallies before they are done. One woman who was forced to attend one of those rallies said attending Zanu PF rallies was a torturous experience. She said, mutungamiri wenyika anongoti boo 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 boo, hapana zvaanotaura zvinobatsira. That is, the president says nothing of value to the people except to be shouting boo boo boo. Nothing helpful ever comes from his mouth. Another citizen said Zanu PF speeches at rallies are full of threats. People are constantly reminded that Zanu PF Ndeye Ropa, a party of blood. We did not want to come to this rally, the citizen said. It was a waste of time, but we were threatened that if we did not come to the rally, we would be declared enemies of the ruling party, and anything can happen to you that will make you regret missing the rally. Another man said he was told point blank. What this shows is that Zanu PF has absolutely no message for the people. The ruling party has no realistic plans to promote community or national development. Zanu PF has a trail of broken and unfulfilled promises. According to one human rights organization, Zanu PF only fulfilled the 13 out of 235 electoral promises made in 2018. One occasion was when Mnangagwa was scheduled to address a rally at Epworth ahead of the by-elections. It was widely publicized that Mnangagwa was going to give 10,000 title deeds at the rally. Thousands of people came to the rally, but did Mnangagwa bring those title deeds? Hell no. He said he realized later there was need to plan before granting the title deeds. Later on, officials in his ministry said there were no plans to give title deeds. That was the end of the story. That promise for title deeds was only to attract people to the Mnangagwa rally. In 2013, the Interministerial Task Force on Legislative Alignment, or IMT, failed to spearhead legislative alignment, hence questioning the government's commitment to usher in genuine reform to the state administration and human rights legal framework in the country. What happened here was 2013 was when the new constitution of Zimbabwe was approved. It was the people of Zimbabwe who voted in favor of that new constitution for Zimbabwe. But what was needed at this point now was to get a legislative alignment. That is, align the constitution to the laws of the country. But nothing happened. Nothing has happened today, and nothing is likely to happen. Some of those provisions in the Constitution were about electoral reforms to make elections more free and fair. And those electoral reforms in the Constitution have not been aligned into law. So the country is going into 2023 elections without those electoral reforms. And the failure to fulfill promises and the fact that Zanu PF has been ruling Zimbabwe for 42 years and has very little to show by way of human socio-economic development is what Zimbabweans are observing. And is the basis for the widespread frustration by the masses in Zimbabwe. The Zanu PF regime has failed to make long-term plans for Zimbabwe. At the time of independence in 1980, Zimbabwe's population was 7.4 million. It grew to 10.43 million by 1990 and 11.88 million in 2000. In 2010, the population grew to 12.7 million and 14.86 million in 2020. The population of Zimbabwe is now 15 million. And this population has doubled since independence. It is expected to double to 30 million by 2030. Given this increase in Zimbabwe's population, if one looks at the infrastructure on the ground, it has not been developed to meet the needs of the changing population. A country's level of development is measured by the United Nations by what is known as the Human Development Index, or HDI. The Human Development Index is a summary measure of average achievement in key dimensions of human development, like a long and healthy life, literacy, having a decent standard of living. The HDI, or Human Development Index, is the geometric mean of normalized indices for each of those three dimensions. When people say ZANU has failed to develop Zimbabwe, they are looking at the Human Development Index for Zimbabwe. The health dimension is assessed by life expectancy at birth. The education dimension is measured by the mean of years of schooling for adults aged 25 years or more, and expected years of schooling for children of school entering age. The standard of living dimension is measured by gross national income per capita. The Human Development Index uses the logarithm of income to reflect the diminishing importance of income with increasing GNI. The scores for the three HDI dimension indices are then aggregated to a composite index using this geometric mean. So it's all those things that are necessary for human socio-economic development put together. They come up under the HDI with a number that tells a particular country how far it has developed and its level of development. Zimbabwe's HDI value for 2019 is 0.571. This put the country in what is known as the medium human development category, and it positioned Zimbabwe at 150 out of 189 countries and territories. So in terms of the Human Development Index, Zimbabwe ranks 150 out of 189 countries. So you can see it's really low. Between 1990 and 2019, Zimbabwe's Human Development Index value increased from 0.478 to the present 0.571. It was an increase of 19.5%. Now, a Human Development Index of 0.8 is considered very high, which means the country has a relatively well-developed human development infrastructure. Zimbabwe's HDI of 0.571 means the country, Zimbabwe that is, has the low end of the medium. In fact, Zimbabwe's HDI is close to what is known as low human development. And that is why Zimbabwe ranks 150 out of 189 countries. And that's an indication of the level of poverty in Zimbabwe. It is estimated that 50% of the Zimbabwean population live under what is known as extreme poverty. And extreme poverty is the outcome of a low human development index that Zimbabwe has registered. In the past elections, the top officials in Zanu PF knew that their chances of winning elections were marginal at the best. But they always relied on the securocrats in the Joint Operations Command, or JOC, to rescue Zanu PF. What that meant was, in the past, Zanu has always relied on the military to manipulate the election results in favor of Zanu PF. Now, some people may ask, why is Zanu PF not that confident that the same thing will happen in 2023? Well, what has changed now? Well, quite a lot has changed in Zimbabwe. Rigging elections using politically motivated violence against the opposition supporters and other efforts to win elections are shunned upon by the majority of Zimbabweans. So is the Zanu PF narrative that the ruling party won the liberation struggle for Zimbabweans from white settler colonial rule in 1980. What Zanu PF and its hired thugs do not seem to understand is that more than 70% of the Zimbabwean population was born after independence. They do not relate to the liberation war stories. These are born frees. They are most concerned with finding good jobs, getting a paycheck, buying houses, buying cars, and starting families. These youths, who form about 70% of the population, are now resisting being enlisted in the so-called National Youth Service. In the past, the National Youth Service was associated with the lawless, terror, and violence. Its young participants were nicknamed the Green Bombers because of the color of uniforms they used to wear. These Green Bombers were used as instruments of Zanu PF violence. Many youths who defected from the Green Bombers gave horrifying accounts of what they were trained and assigned to do. One youth said since he defected and sought refuge in South Africa, he had endless nightmares about what he did. He said they, as Green Bombers, they were taught how to kill and were in fact assigned to kill certain MDCT officials, especially in rural areas. He also said before they went out on their assignments of terror and violence and murder, they were forced to take marijuana and other hallucinatory drugs to make them numb and insensitive to the horrors they were assigned to commit. He also said that as part of their payment, they were allowed to rape any women members of the opposition MDCT. They were assured that they would not be arrested for rape because police in Zimbabwe are under strict instructions not to arrest any member of Zanu PF for any crimes, no matter how horrible the crimes are. Now, some people may say, well, a few Zanu PF members have been arrested. Yes, but are they in jail right now? If they stay in jail, how long do they stay in jail? Most of them are out on bail and may never be brought back to the courts again. Right now, Zimbabwe's economy is in shambles, largely because of corruption and mismanagement by the Zanu PF regime. Nobody believes Zanu PF propaganda that the economy is in this condition because of what they call sanctions. Even Zanu PF is now talking less about sanctions because they know it's not true and they know nobody believes them. Zanu PF is completely silent on the elephant in the Zimbabwean economy. That is corruption. Corruption is costing Zimbabwe billions of US dollars every year. Economists have estimated that if corruption was addressed and reduced by at least 50%, Zimbabwe's economy and infrastructure would be significantly improved. But Zanu PF is completely silent on this elephant in the room, corruption. At one rally, Mnangagwa briefly addressed the problem of corruption. And all he said about corruption was he was constantly asked what the Zanu PF regime had done or was doing to stop corruption since independence. And here was Mnangagwa's reply. I wanted to discuss this subject, but then I realized that I had been part of the government. I have been part of the government since independence. Saka ndakati rega ndinyarare. So I decided to keep quiet about it, referring to corruption. That was Mnangagwa speaking at a public rally. At another rally, Mnangagwa addressed the same issue again of corruption, and all he could say about corruption is he had received a letter from someone in the civil service informing him that certain individuals were engaged in corruption by misusing taxpayers' money. Mnangagwa said the letter ended by asking him what he was going to do about this. Mnangagwa said, I responded by telling the person, Musoro wako. In other words, shut up. And that's all he had to say about corruption. The strange thing about these outbursts on corruption was Mnangagwa made them in a public rally. The message to Zimbabweans was very clear. Mnangagwa, by his own admission, has chosen to keep quiet on the subject of corruption. Corruption which is draining Zimbabwe billions of US dollars every year. Corruption is also increasing Zimbabwe's overall debt. According to former Finance Minister Tendai Biti, Zimbabwe's consolidated debt is 19.5 billion US dollars. This means every Zimbabwean, including a child born today, owes 100,000 US dollars. If you are a Zimbabwean, wherever you are, you owe 100,000 US dollars of this debt. The problem is Zimbabweans do not know who contracted this debt. Zimbabweans do not know what this money was used for. According to Tendai Biti, under sections 298, 299, 114, 117, 302, 303, 305, 327. All of those are sections of the Constitution. Under those sections, Parliament has the power to oversee government debt contracts and expenditures. Parliament is a watchdog, plays a watchdog role, and must give prior approval on all contracted debts. What this means is the government cannot contract debts without obtaining prior approval from Parliament. The government must tell Parliament where it wants to contract that debt and what it wants to use that debt for. Yet, the Zanu PF regime has completely bypassed Parliament and has contracted these debts without consulting Parliament. To repeat, Zanu PF regime has never consulted or requested prior approval from Parliament to contract these debts. So, the question that arises is, Where were these debts contracted from? And what are these debts being used for? Well, the answer is obvious. Those debts are part of the corruption, the endemic corruption that has reduced Zimbabweans to extreme poverty. Remember, I said earlier, 50% of the Zimbabwean population lives in extreme poverty, according to figures from the World Bank. One thing for sure is corruption will continue to hang like the albatross around Zanu PF neck. And Zanu PF will not be able to shake off this albatross. To make matters worse, Zimbabweans now see that Zanu PF is enriching itself through corruption. Zanu PF officials and high-ranking members are living very affluent lives. They have mansions, modern, expensive, flashy cars. They own multiple farms. Some of them are leasing those farms to white commercial farmers. Yes, the same white commercial farmers Zanu PF thugs kicked out in 2000. Zanu PF apparatchiki or top officials send their children and families to schools abroad, to the UK, to the United States, and other European countries. The same countries Zanu PF has habitually accused of being imperialist countries. However, in the meantime, Triple C is slowly and steadily amassing friends, especially from the SADC region. Last year, the new Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema turned out to be a dear friend of Triple C and Chamisa. Well, last year it was the MDC alliance, and now Triple C, and particularly Chamisa. Why? Because both Chamisa and Hichilema suffered the same experiences during election campaigns. Hichilema was prevented from addressing rallies and was jailed on frivolous charges throughout Zambia. But he eventually prevailed and won with a landslide. Today, Hichilema is Triple C's best friend ever. And Triple C can count on Zambia for support in influencing SADC in particular to take a much more aggressive position against human rights violations in Zimbabwe. Another very good friend of Triple C and Chamisa is Raila Odinga. He is widely expected to win in Kenya's elections on August 9. Raila Odinga attended the funeral. He was a good friend of Morgan Tsvangirai, the MDCT, the MDC alliance. He was a good friend. In fact, he attended the funeral of the late Morgan Tsvangirai and was pictured having a pleasant conversation with Chamisa and other MDC alliance officials. When Raila Odinga served as Prime Minister in Kenya some years ago, it was Odinga who called for an African military force to remove Mugabe from office. There is another good friend for Triple C. In Rwanda, President Kagame, who was host to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda recently, resisted pleas from Mnangagwa to readmit Zimbabwe into the Commonwealth. In an interview, Kagame was asked about negative images and perceptions about Zimbabwe. Kagame was blunt and insightful. He said before Zimbabwean, although he didn't mention them by name, but he said before Zimbabwean authorities can change negative international perceptions about the country, they must first convince their own citizens about those negative perceptions. What this means is Mnangagwa and Zanu PF must show Zimbabweans what they have done for them since independence to deserve a re-election in 2023. But the problem for Mnangagwa and Zanu PF is the ruling party has nothing substantive to convince Zimbabweans that their lives have improved since independence. Zimbabweans know Mnangagwa and Zanu PF have failed to govern the country. Under international law of social contracts, the Zimbabweans now have every right to remove Mnangagwa and Zanu PF from government using whatever means they choose.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for